we gave to the lecture was chaos in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then should the West send more troops, question mark. Well, as far as the first part of the title goes, what has been happening today, both in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, has been showing in a cruel way that we were pretty much on issue. The situation in Kabul and beyond, but that the rest of Afghanistan has been in dire straits for quite a few years is known. Today it was again showed that even Kabul is not beyond the reach of the insurgency anymore. So that has been blatantly clear again today and has been demonstrated in a violent way also. Even more violently, it was shown in Peshawar today that on the Pakistani side of the border, chaos is also spreading, and the threat of the Taliban, Al-Qaeda and jihadi groups to the Pakistani state, to stability in South and Central Asia is growing by the day. Whether we are entering or sinking further into chaos and in trouble, or whether we will see a rebound of democratic forces, of freedom, of development and justice is something that is to be discussed and is something that will form the core of our discussion tonight.
Today has been such a day with 90 dead in Peshawar with the suicide bombing, 8 people dead in Kabul, 6 of them UN officials. It's been a very, very bad day, and it's very hard perhaps to argue on a day like this that we need to remain committed to this region. Let me just briefly describe the situation to you. It is extremely pessimistic. There's a major Taliban offensive in Afghanistan. And they're certainly trying to prepare a very strong position before the winter months, where fighting will be reduced. They are also determined to create rifts within Washington, within the NATO alliance, to perhaps get 1 or 2 countries to pull out of Afghanistan so that NATO itself starts unraveling. They would like to topple the Karzai regime, of course, and this highly controversial and rigged election has been a great asset to them. At the same time, we have a Taliban phenomenon in Pakistan, which is now cross-country. It is not just a tribal movement in the far northwest of the country. It engages militant groups in Punjab, in Karachi, all over the country. And they too, they want to topple the government. They want to defeat the Pakistan army, and they want to bring Pakistan under some kind of Taliban regime. Behind it all is the figure of Al-Qaeda, which is also based in Pakistan. The leadership is living in Pakistan. And there's no question that Al-Qaeda's ambitions remain perhaps even larger. And perhaps they have been much more successful than they were before 9/11. And lastly, of course, we've had these very terrible elections in Afghanistan, which have robbed the credibility and the legitimacy of the Afghan leadership, of President Karzai, of the whole democratic process, and frankly they have also robbed the legitimacy and credibility of the West. Because what was the West doing for the last 3 months when there were every sign that rigging was taking place? And this election was being fixed by various power brokers. The United States was there, the United Nations was there, the European Union was there, everybody had their delegations, and yet there was not a squeak out of anyone as to what was going on. So I think the West has also lost an enormous amount of credibility in these elections. Now, how did we get from 2001, when everything seemed to be rosy, when all the promises were being made about reconstruction and development, and Bush and Blair and the European leadership was promising the earth to the Afghans? How did we get there from there to where we are today? President Bush went to war in Iraq and literally abandoned Afghanistan. Afghanistan was left not even as a second string, it was really left down in the marker. Afghanistan never got the troops for security, it never got the money, it never got the reconstruction, it never got the civilian capacity, the foreign experts and all who would come and rebuild the economy. In fact, very little was done. Secondly, there was no regional strategy to bring and involve the neighboring countries into the rebuilding of Afghanistan because there was no plan to rebuild Afghanistan. The whole plan was to invade Iraq, which was, shooting off on the false premise. And unfortunately, the Europeans, a lot of the Europeans who decided to send troops to Afghanistan as part of NATO, did so not out of really good intentions to do good for Afghanistan and the region, but did so because they wanted to please the Americans, because they didn't want to send troops to Iraq, they wanted to keep on the right side of President Bush, and there were all sorts of reasons, wrong reasons, for many of European governments to send troops to Afghanistan as part of the NATO contingent. Now, the biggest failure, as I see it, of the Bush administration was the failure to rebuild the Afghan economy. Afghanistan had a subsistence economy before the Soviets invaded, but it was an economy in which nobody starved, and in the amazing period of the 7 years of Bush, we never got a single dollar invested in agriculture, even though 80% of the people lived outside, in the countryside. It's only now that we're seeing this shift. So we never saw the infrastructure rebuilt. Now, nobody was asking for an infrastructure even like Pakistan or India or Iraq. But, before 1979, every Afghan city had electricity. If I tell you that electricity was not provided to Kabul until last year, for 7 years, Kabul had no electricity. The roads, water, irrigation, all the things that could have sustained an economy were never built. I still believe that in Afghanistan, the Taliban can be turned around. And I think the reason for that is that the bottom line in Afghanistan is that the Afghans do not want the Taliban back. I don't think this has been emphasized enough by governments and by agencies and by aid agencies. But the Afghans are the only people in the world who have experienced the Taliban regime for 7-8 years in the 90s. They know what it's like to live under the Taliban, who had no economic agenda, who had no social agenda, who were ostracized by the entire world, and led most Afghans to the brink of starvation just before 2001, before 9/11 happened. Now, I think a major effort has to be made. It's been very wrong of many European governments to push this whole issue under the carpet. There are many governments which have not discussed this in their parliaments, which pretend that this issue doesn't exist, or which pretend that their troops are carrying out reconstruction and development, when actually they should be fighting an insurgency in Afghanistan, because there's no reconstruction going on. Let me assure you, or very little at the moment, because the Taliban have really paralyzed so much area in Afghanistan that there's very little that you can do in terms of reconstruction and rebuilding until you push the Taliban back. So what is needed simply is that governments in Europe have to be more transparent about what is going on in Afghanistan. I don't think, it is a mistake for governments to stand up and say the situation is very bad. But this does not mean that we walk away from it. This means that we stay committed and in fact probably increase our commitment. I would like to see greater transparency amongst governments, from the European Union, from NATO, from parliaments in all the major European countries.